Health inspectors of Reddit, what's the worst violation you've ever seen? My stepdad used to be a baker in an authentic recreation of an 18th century New French fortress. Because they sell bread to the public, the health inspector came by, and she was ripping into my stepdad for violations like the stonework walls, the doorless entranceways, or the lack of mosquito zapper. He pointed out that they were following the highest standards except for things that would destroy the authenticity of this 18th century bakery. The health inspector relented and agreed to give him a pass. After verifying the food storage area was secure, they went to the shed, which was a doorless building attached to the bakery. As the health inspector went in, there happened to be an escaped cow licking all of the loaves. My stepdad could only say, honestly, this never happens. They passed the health inspection. TL. Doctor, health inspector witnesses escaped farm animal licking all the bread in a bakery, passes health inspection anyway. My favorite Chinese restaurant got shut down. My ex-wife worked for the city and I asked her what was the deal. She said the health inspectors found something leaking from the ceiling. They lifted the ceiling tile and shined a flashlight and saw multiple eyes staring back at them. It was chickens. They were raising chickens in the ceiling and chicken shit was dripping in the food that I had been eating at least once a week. Finally, something I can comment on. My uncle is a health inspector in rural Australia. He got several complaints about a fish and chips shop in a small town in Victoria, with reports of it being a bit grotty and people getting chunks of hair in their hot chips. So he rocks up one day unannounced on a blazing hot day in the middle of summer, and the owner grades him and shows him around wearing a white singlet top with sweat patches under the arms, short shorts and no shoes. This guy's body was covered in hair. Not just on his arms and chest, but his back and neck were like a werewolf. Clearly, this must be the source of the hair in the chips. My uncle decides to make a tactful comment about having wear appropriate clothes when working, so as to protect against hot oil burns. After seeing the property and giving a few basic suggestions, the only other thing he notices that needs immediate attention is the deep fryer itself. The oil is old and filthy, and likely full of this guy's hair, so he orders the bloke to drain it out right then and there. The owner does so, and at the bottom of the oil vat is a dead, deep fried and crispy cat. Totally unfazed, the owner simply said, "Oh, that's where my cat went." Turns out a few months previously the shop was having a rodent problem, so the owner bought in a cat to catch them. He thought the cat escaped overnight and ran away. Nope. Looks like little Fluffy drowned in the deep frying oil, and Mr. Chippy has been frying him up over and over again ever since. The clumps of hair locals were complaining about weren't from the half-man half-wolf owner, but the fur and flesh of a dead cat. My friend was inspecting a restaurant, walked out the back to find a man stirring a huge pot of curry with his arm. No spoon or anything, just up to his hairy elbows in curry. My stepmother is the lead health inspector for a decent-sized suburban town. While I have never asked what the worst thing she has witnessed as part of her job was, I do know of one instance that was pretty gross. A truck full of lobsters was traveling down the highway and crashed. The police came, and eventually they towed the truck. As a board of health inspector, my stepmother was consulted to see if any of the lobsters were viable, and she told them no, the load is a total loss, since there were literally lobsters scattered across the highway covered in dirt, sand, etc. Fast forward 24 hours, and one of the restaurants in town ran a special, twin lobsters for $19.99. Apparently the owner of the trucking/towing company knew the restaurant owner pretty well, so they made a deal whereby the restaurant would pay a very discounted price for the road lobsters. The restaurant would turn around and illegally serve the lobsters to unsuspecting customers or sell them out of a truck behind the restaurant. I'm not sure what the repercussions were, but I think they were shut down for like a week. They closed shortly thereafter and now there's a new restaurant there. The towing company lost their contract to tow vehicle/semi trucks with the town and state. Not a health inspector, but worked in a restaurant where the managers were good friends with one. The coffee/ice cream shop next door was shut down out of nowhere, and we were all shocked because they were pretty busy. Health inspector came in one day and manager asked why it was shut down. Health inspector proceeded to tell my manager that he walked in unannounced early one morning before the shop opened, only to find the owner jerking off behind the counter by the ice cream. When I went to culinary school, one of professors made the statement, if you want to know how clean a restaurant's kitchen is, go to bathroom first, before you are seated. If the bathroom is dirty, there is a good chance the kitchen is in the same condition. Not a health inspector, but someone in my city repainted their floor with non-slip paint and literally painted over a dead rat, sealing it in there. And to top it off, it was in the middle of the kitchen, not under a bench or anything similar. Did food safety inspection at a large slaughterhouse for a while. We did our own inspections each shift and the government inspector stopped by once a day too. One day, I came round a corner, and one of the workers who was running service for the butchers had dropped a ham on the floor. So, the proper way to handle this for him was to leave it there, and call for a re-inspector to come pick it up, take it out to carve off any contaminated bits and rinse it in boiling water. Now it relatively often happened meat was dropped on the floor. It's just very hard to avoid it when running in a factory setting with human labor. So this was common. What was uncommon was what the guy did. First he tried catching it as it fell, which would have been fine. No contact with any surface and he could just thrown it back into the tub it had fallen out of. He didn't catch it though, and it landed on the floor. Thinking that Noon was watching, he tried picking it up, and dropped it again. He did this 3 times. So first and foremost, he's not supposed to be touching anything that's been on the floor. It cross-contaminates his hands, and he has nowhere to put the contaminated product anyway. But he did this 3 times, and dropped it 3 times. Freshly carved hams can be slippery when wearing vinyl gloves. He then, out of pure frustration/annoyance at the unwieldy ham, dropped down on all 4s, and proceeded to pick up the raw, freshly cut, 6-kilo ham, by his teeth. Stood up, ham dangling from his choppers, and dropped it into the tub with around 600 kilograms of product, and drove off with the tub for processing. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product discarded. The dumpster needed to be moved 6 inches from the back exit of the bar. Otherwise everything I inspected was up to standard. Bartender seemed sweaty all the time. Bathroom stalls could have used a little touch up. Didn't get to spend much time in the basement. I became quite dizzy, for some reason. They were given a passing grade. My dad was one, is now retired. Of everything I ever heard, to jump out. He noted the trays at a Chinese restaurant weren't clean or warm. When he asked the employees, they acknowledged the heating element had failed, but that there was still chemical backup. Somehow, though, it wasn't hitting the dishes. Then he saw a cockroach crawl out of the washer. Attempting to understand how the dishes were not getting rinsed, he found that it was backed up with cockroaches. They were cleaning the trays. They closed for remodeling for 3 days, but it was really cleaning up in order to pass inspection before they were allowed to open again. At a similar restaurant, he asked about a pail on the floor, filled with a green substance. Soup of the day, they told him. Dad asked what it was, and was told it was scraps. The bucket was never emptied. It turned out, the scraps going in roughly equaled the soup going out, which meant that there was stuff in there that had been there for weeks at room temp, on the floor. Dad had them dump it as he looked on. A bonus story was when he caught a guy smoking in a kitchen and exposed the cigarette behind his back with a handshake. Mentioned this one somewhere before on Reddit. Used to have a job working as an inspector for storage tanks at places like dairies and factories. Went to a cheesecake factory once to test a milk storage tank. It had just been cleaned and was being prepped to be filled with a tanker full of milk. I noticed the floor of the tank was covered in bleach. It turned out, the floor manager couldn't be asked to spend the time sucking out the rest of the cleaning fluid used in the cleaning process, and, as standard, just filled the tank with milk on top of a dozen gallons of bleach. His theory was that there was enough milk to dilute the bleach to acceptable consumption levels. I wrote a report, and he was promptly fired. Not a health inspector, but a Chinese buffet near me was closed down because it got a 0/5 in its inspection. I got food poisoning from there once. The staff just got up and left. Locked the door. Never went back. All the food was still out and everything. A week later a man was walking his dog past said Chinese buffet and heard a loud buzzing noise. Looked through the window to see hundreds of thousands of flies that had taken over the building as their new home. Was so bad that Pizza Hut next door had to close too. Not a health inspector, but my mom used to work at this restaurant where the owner just did not give a shit. It was a Mexican restaurant and my mom told me that once a lady came in asking for caldo de res, beef soup, but they didn't have any more meat, at least not the one used for that dish. They were about to let the lady know when the owner stepped up and told the lady that her food would be right out. The server and my mom were both confused as to what she was going to do. Well, this lady goes and literally digs through the fucking trash and pulls out some beef, some still with bone. She then ran it through water, cooked it and served it to that poor lady. My mom says the lady was even sucking the bone and she almost felt sick watching. My mom quit that job soon after. Worked in a restaurant. Sitting in the office one day I hear an awful squeaking/shrieking noise. Took me a little while to find the source. Source turned out to be a mouse. Stuck in some old spilled pancake syrup under a storage shelf. Being eaten alive by the mouse. Stuck next to it. Not health inspector, but I worked as an assistant cook in a restaurant. 2 weeks into the job, I opened a cupboard to get a can of tomato sauce and I see a huge ass tarantula scuttling away behind the cans. I told the boss what I had seen, so that maybe we should get someone to deal with the huge ass spider living in the kitchen. Boss turns to me and say, I see you've met Eduardo. Just don't put your hand too close to him and you'll be good. Later another cook proceeded to explain to me the spider been living there for 2 years and they allowed it because he kept rodents and roaches away. This is a true story. So know this, Reddit. Every time that you think about swatting a spider, remember that there is a possibility that a friendly spider is guarding your favorite restaurant's food against nasty critters. Former inspector here. I once discovered a rat infestation in the kitchen of a hospital. They asked me if I could prove my suspicions. I pointed out the numerous foodstuffs with 1-2 inches circular holes chewed in them, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the trailer droppings and footprints coming and going from a hole in the floor drain, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the 3 dead rats I had discovered under and around equipment. I think they began to believe me at that point. Citations included rat infestation and absolutely deplorable cleaning practices. Not a health inspector, but assistant manager at a restaurant for a year between university. I once saw my sous chef flick a fillet steak out of the pan, kick it back up with his foot and land it back in the pan to continue cooking. He did this 3/4 times. I was watching on the CCTV trying not to laugh every time he celebrated each catch. I'm not a health inspector, but I've been waiting tables since I turned 16. Some of the things I've witnessed have really turned me off to going out to eat. The worst thing I can think of right now is when I saw a manager blow his nose into the salad dressing and mix it up. I wish I was lying. I used to manage a well-known sandwich shop. One day, I discovered a huge colony of black stachybotrys mold growing behind one of the walls. I mentioned it to my assistant manager, who told me that everyone knew it was there and that the entire staff assumed that I also knew about it and was just keeping my mouth shut. I reported it to the district manager and the owner that day. They both told me that they knew for a fact that black mold was harmless and that they weren't going to pay $3,000 to tear out the drywall and replace it. I was fired inside of a week. I reported them to the local health department, but by the time the health department got around to doing the inspection, they had already fixed the wall. When my dad was a teenager, he would go to a beach half an hour away with his mates, and on the way home they would stop at a great pie place. It was well known, and dad says they served the greatest pies ever. They got shut down after it got out their pies were full of tinned dog food. On a plus note, I've been a chef for 17 years and haven't ever seen anything overly gross at a restaurant I've worked at. I've mostly done fine dining and high-end chains though. Although traveling to other countries is a different matter. You may resume eating.